Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. It was around the 3-month mark when we stopped calling it waiting this out. There was nothing to wait for anymore. No help coming, no cure, no organized recovery, not in the city, not in the countryside. We were still alive. Me, Renee, Noah and Ava, and we stayed that way by staying mobile, by never trusting what worked yesterday to still work today. We moved between places that felt secure only until the noises started. A strip mall with metal shutters, a parking garage where the wind carried every sound for blocks, a library that still smelled of burned pages. The nights dragged, the days blurred together. Everywhere we stopped had its ghosts, a smear of dried blood on a light switch, cans stacked neatly beside an open window, a child's shoe. Sometimes it felt like the whole city was built from evidence of people we never got to meet. We didn't talk about the ones we'd lost often, but when we did, it was blunt. No pretending, no soft phrasing. One morning, while we packed gear near an old overpass, Noah stopped tightening his boots and said, "I still see Gus when I close my eyes." Renee looked up, then back at her pack. "I see May," she said quietly. "I think she'd hate what we've become." Ava, sitting nearby with her hair tucked under a ball cap, just said she'd understand it. Nobody added anything after that. We finished packing in silence. We all changed. That was the truth no one had to say out loud. Noah used to laugh at everything. Now he only smiled when a plan worked. Ava, once glued to her phone, had become sharper than any of us, counting rounds, checking corners, memorizing paths. Renee had gone quieter too, but there was a steadiness in her that held us together. I saw it every time she looked at the map before dawn. She wasn't looking for where we were going. She was looking for where not to die. We tried the warehouses first. I used to work in that district, so I knew where the water valves were, where the forklifts were stored, where management hid the keys. I figured it would be the safest place left. I was wrong. The infected had packed themselves in so tight it was hard to see floor between them. They moved slow, bumping into each other, grunting at sounds we couldn't hear. Dozens, maybe 100. The smell carried long before we saw them. We backed off before they caught our scent. The office complex wasn't better. The ground floor looked clean until you noticed the drag marks on the tile. Someone had locked themselves in the boardroom and died trying to keep it that way. The projector was still on, pointing at a wall with the words, "Emergency Plan Revision," frozen mid-slide. Renee muttered, "Still having meetings." I didn't answer. That's what the world used to be. People arguing in circles, while everything burned behind them. We left empty-handed. 2 blocks over, Noah spotted a small clinic. The door was cracked, and he wanted to check it. I told him no. Too narrow, too dark. He argued, said we needed bandages. Renee took my side without a word. Later, when we stopped to rest, he said, "You're not scared of them anymore. You're scared of making noise." I told him that's what survival looked like now. You fear the right things. A week later, we reached the logistics yard where my old company kept its trucks. The gate was bent in and burned. Someone had tried to hold the place and failed. There were still tire ruts in the mud from the armored vehicles that took whatever was left. Inside, pallets were scattered, half torn open. My locker had been pried off its hinges. The shelves were stripped bare. Whoever came last left their mess behind. Footprints, broken glass, a dried puddle where someone bled out near the coffee machine. I stood there for a long time until Renee said, "Marcus, we can't bring back what we buried." We crossed the bridge district next. Half the spans were blocked by crashed buses. The rest had traps, nails, wires, bottles, everything meant to pop tires or slow people. No signs of life. No warning spray paint. The kind of traps meant for the living, not the dead. We crossed one at dawn and made it halfway before a set of flares lit the far end. No people followed. Just a message. Get off the bridge. We moved fast and didn't look back. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She asked, Do you think the people setting traps are worse than the infected? I said, they're scared, not evil. She said, you used to think fear was a choice. I said, I used to have choices. She didn't say anything after that. She just stared at the dark until her breathing evened out. The days started blending. We hunted small things that didn't smell like rot. Squirrels, rats, the occasional pigeon. Renee found an overgrown backyard with tomatoes still hanging, half green, half split. We ate them without washing. No one got sick. We were past the point of worrying about germs. That was when we started hearing talk about the zoo. Not from people we met, there weren't many left, but from the open band chatter on old emergency frequencies. Someone said animals were still alive in the enclosure zones, untouched by infection. That alone sounded like hope, even if I didn't believe in it. I remembered the layout from years ago. Fences, trenches, concrete barriers built for crowd control, backup generators, and water systems for animals. It wasn't a bad idea. I told Renee we'd check it. She didn't argue, which meant she'd already thought about it too. Noah nodded. Ava just said, if it has fences, it's better than the streets. That was all we needed. We packed light. 4 packs, 2 rifles, a short-barreled shotgun, and a hammer Ava refused to replace. We left what we couldn't carry. It felt wrong walking away from that pile of gear, but weight gets you killed faster than bullets. We cut through a public park the next morning. The place looked wild now. Grass knee-high, swings tangled, tennis courts full of weeds. A small herd of deer was feeding in the distance. They looked healthy, unbothered. It was the first time in months I'd seen animals acting normal. Renee noticed it too. No infected around, she said quietly. Not even birds scattering. That silence made us all pay attention. We set up camp near a fountain bed and shared the last can of fruit we'd been saving. Noah asked, what if it's overrun too? I said, then we move again. Renee looked at me for a moment. And if it's not? She asked. Then we stop running. The next morning we broke camp early, before sunrise. The zoo wasn't far, maybe 2 miles through overgrown neighborhoods and half-collapsed fences. The closer we got, the quieter it felt. Streets narrowed, houses thinned out. You could almost forget what the world had turned into, if you didn't look too long at the broken signs or the dried streaks on the asphalt. When we finally reached the service road, I told everyone to hold position. The hedges were high, almost untouched, and the metal posts still had paint on them. The air smelled clean, like dust and old grass instead of rot. That alone told me something good. I crouched and touched the fence. It was solid steel, not the cheap aluminum that bends after one season. 2 layers, tight spacing, good welds. No engines, no wind-moving glass. No voices. Birds somewhere deeper in. I turned back to my family and said quietly, we go in through the staff gate. Stay clear of the public entrance. Renee already had the bolt cutters ready, the pack open. She nodded once. Noah and Ava took positions by the hedge, weapons ready but low. I put my hand on the gate and felt for vibration. Nothing. Still and silent. The sun was low, the light clean. The kind of light that makes you think maybe, just maybe, you found a place that could hold. I looked at Renee, then at the kids. This is it, I said. If it's clear, we stay. We make it ours. She didn't need convincing. She just said, then let's make it count. Noah took the cutters to the outer chain, slow squeezes so the links would not ping. Ava watched the path behind us with the rifle down at low ready and the sling snug. I counted the steps in and kept a running map in my head. 8 paces to the inner lane, 5 more to the second chain. Renee slipped the fresh link through as soon as Noah cut the old one. We did not let the gate swing wide. We moved as a unit and pulled it back after us. I took the lead past the hedges into the employee yard. A faded golf cart sat under a torn tarp. A metal door with a wired window led into the veterinary clinic. I rapped once with the tip of the spear shaft and stepped back. I waited. Nothing answered. Inside smelled of dust and old disinfectant. The clinic had a wide counter, a glass front fridge, and 3 doors down a hall. I kept the spear forward and pushed each door with my foot before stepping across. Exam room to the left with cabinets. A small operating room with a steel table. A storeroom with empty shelves and 1 sealed bin. Renee moved past me in a quiet line and checked needles, syringes, tape and drapes. She said she could sterilize a small set in the pressure pot if we got the solar to wake up. I looked out the rear window. 4 small panels sat on the roof under a plastic film coated with grime. That was manageable. We slept in shifts that first night. I took the tram platform as overwatch. From there I could see the main concourse and the path to the primate house. The city beyond the trees still sent up thin columns of smoke, but no light. I kept the drone cold. We did not need it yet. We ate from pouches in the clinic office with the blinds closed, and no voices above a whisper. I told everyone the rule for this site. No shouting, no running unless someone called it. No gate opens just because we think we hear someone. We would sleep inside the clinic and on the roof. We would not touch the public side until we had the service lanes locked down. At first light, I walked the inner perimeter with Noah. We moved along the tram rails because they made a quiet path with fewer dry leaves. We passed the amphitheater and the kids' play zone, both empty. The primate house door stood open, and the lock plate was bent. That meant someone had pried it weeks ago. I did not go in. I marked it for later with a strip of blue tape on the frame. We checked the pump yard. A standpipe ran from the ground to an old hand pump with a long handle. The pump leather had dried and cracked. I poured a little water down the body, primed it, and pulled. The first strokes brought only air. Then the handle grew heavy and the pipe gurgled. Water pushed out in a cloudy stream. I let it run, and then filled a bucket and let it settle. Renee ran a test with chlorine, and then boiled 2 liters. She wrote the dose on a strip of gaffer tape and stuck it to the pump. She said the water was workable if we used a settling series, and ran it through filters before cooking or drinking. I told her the pump was the main reason we would stay. Noah took a spare leather scrap from his tool bag and wrapped the joint with waxed cord so the pump would keep suction. Ava stood on the clinic roof and pointed at the combiner box for the panels. The cover hung crooked. She asked if she could open it. I told her to wait until we set a watch. We locked the service lane first. We pulled 2 rolling dumpsters into a U-shape and chained them to the fence posts. We left only a narrow person door between them. Inside that mouth we set a bolt and a secondary latch made of angle iron. That created a sally port. We welded the employee turnstiles shut at the waist bar, and then ran a band of mesh over the tops so jumpers could not get a handhold. We drove 3 anti-lift stakes into the bottom rail of the inner fence so no one could pry it up with a jack. We hung tin cans on fish line through the hedges inside the lane. In daylight the line was invisible, but if anything pushed through, the cans rattled. We did not need power for that. We needed time. In the afternoon, we walked the main concourse. We stayed tight along the buildings and used windows to see inside before we crossed any doors. The food court had trays, paper cups, 2 tall gas cylinders, and a wall of empty refrigerators. We found a half case of bottled water under a counter. We took it and left the place as we found it. The admin building held 2 bodies in office chairs with badges. I did not look at them long. We logged the room and closed the door. At the tram garage we found a 3rd body near the control box. We moved it with gloves and masks and took it to the service lot. Renee said we would handle remains in batches to control exposure and smell. That meant a trench outside the inner ring and a small burn once a week with pallets and scrap. We saved 2 goats from the petting area. They were thin but still strong enough to walk. We moved them to a small pen near the pump where we could watch them. I fixed the latch with a carriage bolt and a 2nd catch. We set a water basin at a level that would not spill. Ava brought old pellets from a feed bin and broke scrub branches for roughage. She kept her voice low and steady while she worked. She did not show much on her face anymore. That started on the hill, and it held here. We named nothing. We recorded everything. The big cat yards were quiet. The dens smelled of old musk and dry rot. The bones told their own story, and we did not stare. We shut the den gates and chained them so no scavenger would drag parts into the walkways. The aquarium glass stood clean, but the tanks were grey and still. We drained them through floor ports so we would not grow mold or draw insects. We put black paper over the inside of the glass panels so we would not reflect light at night and give away movement. Every action was a small reduction of risk. Power came back in a small way on the second day. Noah cleaned the panels with a soft brush and water, then opened the combiner and reseated a loose lug. We found 3 golf cart batteries with fluid still above the plates. We added distilled water from the clinic supply and set a simple series. Ava laid out a priority list on a whiteboard. Radios first, then 1 med light, then the headlamp bank, then the drone pack if there was surplus. No one argued. That lineup kept us alive and able to see a wound. We marked 2 kill corridors before we ever fired a shot. We took the fence panels from the empty meerkat pen and set them waist-high in a zigzag on the main path to the clinic. We measured distances with a tape and chalked marks on the pavement. We drew range cards for each window and door with a simple circle for each 10 paces. We wrote hold points on the cards. Aim at beltline at 20, aim at sternum at 30, aim at upper chest beyond that only if the body is unarmored. We taped the cards inside by each post so anyone could step in and work within the plan. We burned our first batch of remains on the 3rd day. We used pallets and low brush. We stood upwind and kept masks on, and we watched the tree line. There is a way to do this work without bringing attention to yourself. We carried in, set the fire, let it run hot, and cooled the ash. We rinsed tools in a bleach mix and wrote the time and number on a card. We did not add markers inside the perimeter. The hedge line would be the boundary for anything that did not belong near living areas. That night I took the roof with the rifle while Noah sat at the tram with binoculars. Renee boiled water at the service yard on a small stove and kept the flame low behind a windbreak. Ava checked the solar charge numbers and wrote them in a column. The air carried sounds in short bursts. You hear a building settle and then nothing. You hear a shout in the distance and then you keep hearing nothing for a long time. We had been alone for weeks on the move. The zoo felt less exposed because it had walls built for wild animals and crowds. It also had lanes that could direct a swarm if we did our job. I told myself that as I watched the hedges, and I kept repeating the pattern in my head. Lock, direct, reduce, clean. On the morning of the 4th day, we saw the first real test. A collapse somewhere east threw a dust cloud into the air, and a siren wailed for a long stretch before it choked off. Within an hour, a group of infected began to move along the outer road toward our corner. Slow walkers in front, then 2 fast movers in a line behind them, and 1 lean jumper that used low walls to keep speed. Renee told Ava to get ready on the upper window of the clinic and keep breath steady. Noah checked the drone, then left it on the table. We would try to handle this without a lure. I took the sally port with the shield panel angled across the mouth. The first walkers came through the hedge break and hit the mesh band. They got hands into it and then tangled their fingers. We stepped out and finished 2 with poles through the throat and lower jaw. No shouting, no wasted motion. The rest drifted sideways into the zigzag and slowed more. The fast movers saw the bottleneck and tried to jump the waist panels. The net we had strung at head height caught one across the face and spun him toward the ground. The other hit a waist bar and rolled. Ava put a round center on the chest, then another to keep him down. Noah moved left and picked a hold point at the corner of the tram support and used that mark to put a pair into the second fast mover when he stood. The jumper came last and tried to clear the trash can we had set at the edge. He clipped it with 1 foot and lost balance. I stepped forward and drove the spear down and pinned the thigh to the pavement. Renee placed a shot into the hip to break the drive. The body stopped moving hard and then stopped moving at all. We stayed in positions for a full minute after the last shape went down. That prevents surprises. When it stayed quiet, we backed to the clinic and reset the net. I went around to the service yard and washed my hands in bleach water and then in clear water. Renee checked the ground for blood and wiped what she could. We did not leave thick marks. We moved the bodies to the cart and lined them up under a tarp for the next burn day. No one said much. It did not need words. We had built a plan that matched our abilities and the terrain. It worked this time. We found a small wind in the afternoon and used it to start drying the clinic office. Damp rooms grow mold and become hard to live in. Renee propped doors and spread paper on the floor to absorb moisture. Noah tuned the radio with a light touch and rotated through civil bands. We got nothing clear. We could hear a faint voice reading numbers, and then it dropped under static. We did not broadcast. We had nothing to say, and a signal can bring more than help. On the 5th day, we pulled the tramcar 20 feet and parked it across a gap near the main concourse. The wheels let it roll just enough, and then we blocked them. That turned a wide avenue into a narrow pass with strong sides. We put a chain across the top and hung mesh. Ava marked ranges with white chalk and numbered them. We set 2 lengths of rebar with caps into holes we drilled, so the shield panel could rest in a notch and not twist when something hit it. Small work. That is the backbone of living through this. We kept the goats on a tight routine so they would not bleat and draw attention. Morning water, small feed, clean pen, quiet handling. Ava brushed them once with a soft broom, and then cleaned the brush outside the fence so hair would not gather in clumps near the door. She wrote down the amount of milk, and we split it evenly with a measure. Renee found old pasteurization instructions on a card and taped it to the clinic wall. We did not get sick. That mattered more than taste. We checked the primate house on the 6th day. I went in first with the spear shaft and the light held low. The air was stale and heavy. The public side had benches and a long glass wall. The doors to the rear enclosures were open and the locks had pry marks. There were no bodies inside. There were scraps of clothing and trash. Someone had used this place during the first weeks and then moved on. We closed the doors and set new bolts. We hung mesh strips over the back door so anything entering would snag and give a sound. On our way out, we took a coil of hose and 2 buckets. We left everything else as it was. We had enough to carry. On the 7th morning, black trucks appeared 2 blocks away and parked at angles. The same recorded voice we had heard before said this was a controlled zone and ordered processing for survivors. We did not move. We did not answer. The voice repeated the message 2 times and then stopped. Then someone down there started a noise pattern with clatter and bottle crack. The sound bounced off the buildings and fed into our side streets. Infected began to drift our way. We shut the sally port and went dark. I let the first wave pass the outer fence without showing a shape. The trucks waited for our movement. We gave them none. When the pressure built on the hedges, I let Ava launch the drone and run a track along the river road. The recorded clatter pulled a line of bodies away like a magnet, and they turned and followed it past our block. We kept that run short so we would not lose the pack to range. When it returned and set down, the trucks had already backed up and turned east. They had learned nothing useful. We learned that they would try to use the infected as a tool without closing the distance. That meant we would see them again. I made a note of time and direction on the intel board. Late that afternoon, a small group of walkers drifted into the staff lot like lost customers who had no more store to visit. We did not need fire for them. We used poles and quiet steps and kept it clean. We took a break on the clinic steps after the sweep. I looked over at my family. Renee checked a small cut on the back of her hand and cleaned it with alcohol until the skin looked white around the edges. Noah tightened the strap on his rifle and then loosened it, and then tightened it again until it felt right. Ava sat on the top step with the goat list and drew a small square next to the evening feed line so we would not do it twice. We were all still here and still working. That was the measure. On the 8th day, we made a walk to a small sporting goods shop on a side street that we had marked during scouting. We went at first light and used alleys and service doors. We moved on broken tile and dirt instead of smooth walks so our steps would not carry. The front windows were already smashed. We went around back and found the metal door closed with a simple hasp. Noah cut it with the small saw and we eased in. Inside, most racks were empty, but we found a crate of 12-gauge shells under a counter with a broken leg. We also found 3 magazines for the 223 carbines and a coil of suppressor wipes that might give us a small edge on sound. We left a small note on the wall for ourselves with a date so we would not come back for nothing. We left the place as quiet as we found it, and came home by a different path so no pattern would form. By the 9th day, I could read the zoo like a map my hand had drawn. The tram loop made a clean circle between our living rooms and the public side. The amphitheater echoed in a way that made it a bad place to shoot. The aquarium glass carried sound farther than it should. The big cat yards had gate handles that did not rattle. The pump yard handle squeaked unless you pushed it in before you pulled it down. Small notes. I wrote each one on a card and taped them to the Intel board. Ava teased me once for the size of the cards, and then added 3 of her own notes on top of mine. That made me smile without showing it. We saw a new type that afternoon. Not new in form, but in action. A large infected came up to a fence seam and did not smash or claw. It put its hand on the mesh and pressed to feel the give. It watched the camera head in a slow turn and then stepped out of the field of view and pressed again. It moved to each tie and tested which one had slack. It found the tie we had already marked to replace and pushed there twice before it walked away. I called the family to the screen and pointed. I said this kind would come back at night or when alone. It had patience. We swapped the bad ties for carriage bolts under a new band of mesh and put a spring flag under the soil so a small plate would pop if weight hit that seam. We did not sleep early that night. The next day, a small flood of walkers drifted toward the concourse after a distant collapse. We opened our plan again. Renee and Ava took the upper windows. Noah watched the tram curve. I stood by the sally port and had the shield panel on the rebar notches. The swarm hit the zigzag and split. The fast ones tripped into the waist panels and lost speed. Ava worked measured pairs. Noah used his pre-marked hold points and did not chase shots. I pushed back 2 that reached the shield with a flat shove and a foot brace, then stepped out and pinned one so Renee could finish it with 1 clean round. It went fast because we kept the corridor tight. Wide fights get ugly and turn random. Narrow fights use the ground to cut the numbers. We ran the weekly fire that night. We set the trench downwind and waited for a steady breeze. We did not stack bodies high. Low piles burn cleaner and faster. We stood upwind and masked, and we talked only to call each other by name. When the ash cooled, we shoveled it into the pit and covered it. We rinsed boots and handles with bleach water. Renee checked her hands and then checked mine. She always did. I did not argue over extra caution. I had seen what happened when care slipped. I did not want that story here. Food stayed simple. Dry goods, rice, oats, beans, a few old cans of meat that we rotated carefully. We started small raised beds inside a service courtyard so wind would not shred the chutes. Soil came from leaf piles we screened by hand. Renee found onion sets in a staff drawer and said we could try. Ava liked that job. She took the string and laid a straight line and put seed along it with even spacing. It was a quiet task and it calmed the house. We still had the goats and they gave milk enough for a cup each when we were careful. We pasteurized every batch. That rule was taped on the wall, and no one ignored it. I made a checklist for morning and night. Dawn walk on the inner ring, pump cycle and settling, solar check, goat care, clinic clean, midday repair or scavenge, dusk quiet sweep, night watch rotation with 1 always in the clinic and 1 on a roof. We wrote those steps on a board by the door and slid a bolt under each line when the task was done. This kept us from missing steps when we were tired or short on food. We did not trust memory for anything that mattered now. Midweek, 2 scavengers approached the outer fence from the school side. One carried a bucket and one had empty hands raised. We met them at distance inside the hedges where they could not see our posts clearly. The man called out for water and said he had a sick friend. I said we would leave 2 liters on the line and to come back for it when we were out of sight. He tried to talk more. I did not answer. I did not open the gate. We left the water where we said, and then watched from 2 angles. They took it and moved on. I wrote their height, clothing, and direction on a card. No trade, no names, no entry. That is a hard rule, but it keeps a base alive. By the end of the 2nd week, we had a rhythm. The zoo felt less like a wreck and more like a planned space. The clinic ran as our house and hospital. The admin room became the board and range card wall. The tram platform served as a second roof. The pump yard worked as the core, and the goats lived next to it. The concourses were the threat lanes. The big cat dens stayed sealed. The aquarium sat quiet and dark. The primate house was closed and wired. It was not a home in the old sense. It was a place with rules, water, power, and choke points. That is what we needed. On the 15th day, a steam main in the district broke, and the sound rolled through the blocks. 3 screamers came to the perimeter at different points and started to call. It pulled a mixed crowd toward us. We ran the plan. I sent the drone on a short arc with the recorded clatter to bend one line away to the stadium road. That cut the pressure in half. Renee and Ava took the screamers first from fixed positions we had already marked. Noah covered fast movers at the waist barriers. I held the sally port and shifted the shield panel to stop bodies from building a ramp in front of the gate. We worked in short, clean steps. The net held. The tram blockade held. The shield held. The crowd broke and then thinned to nothing. When it was done, I walked the path and kicked loose debris into piles so we would not trip on it later. I rolled my shoulders to ease tight muscles and said nothing. Renee handed me a bottle cap of clean water and a strip of cloth for my hands. She still watched me for a long time after fights. I let her. That night I lay on my back on the clinic roof and looked at nothing. The sky had no planes and no light. The panels ticked softly and a small breeze moved across the roof. I heard Noah click the safety off and on once to make sure his weapon was seated right. I heard Ava turn pages of a small notebook where she wrote numbers no one else could keep straight. I heard Renee put the kettle on for a short boil, just enough to fill the jar we used for morning. The city around us stayed dead and loud in its own way. We were still in it. We chose it for a reason. The ground here had walls, water, and lanes we could bend. The countryside had none of that for us. We would stay until the rules changed again. Morning brought new work. Noah wanted a better way to see the fence seam where the large infected had tested us. We dug a shallow slot and set a spring plate under mesh that would pop a small flag if weight landed where it should not. No power, no sound, just a visual cue. Ava built a second flag on the opposite side in case the first broke. Renee had us run bleach through the room corners where dust gathered and carry out old cushions that held smell. I tightened the last 2 panel ties on the tram blockade and set a second chain low so jumpers could not roll under it. Small changes that took the strain out of a fight later. Food needed help. We went back to the school kitchen by a different route and found one storeroom we had skipped the first pass. Oats, pasta, a crate of powdered milk with a busted corner. We took what we could carry and left the rest neatly stacked. We pushed a rack against the back door from inside, so the next person would have to move it and make enough sound to alert us if we were unlucky and nearby. I scouted a route to a police athletic range that I had seen on a map months ago. The front would be useless, but the back might still carry stock. We timed it for later. We never stacked 2 hard runs in one day. The run to the range came at dawn 2 days later. We moved by alleys and loading docks. We checked roofs from a distance before we went under them. The back door had a lock, but it was weak. Noah cut it and we eased in. We found ear protection and cleaning kits, a small case of 12-gauge slugs, and 3 magazines for the 223. We did not find a weapon worth hauling. We left a small note for ourselves and taped it under a shelf where no one would see it. We left and doubled back 2 blocks before taking our return path so anyone watching would lose the trail. We got home without seeing a single infected. That is rare. We did not celebrate. We just marked the inventory and cleaned the gear. On the 20th day inside the zoo, I took a long walk alone around the inner ring. I counted my steps between posts, between doors, between gates. I stopped at the primate house and listened. I stopped at the pump yard and checked the leather. I stopped at the tram and put my hand on the chain to feel if it had shifted under load. I looked back at the clinic and saw the 2 small shapes on the roof watching me. Renee had the glass on me, and Ava had a notebook on her knee. I lifted my hand and brought it down. 2 taps on my thigh. The signal that I was fine and done. Both of them moved back from the roofline. I went back to the clinic and put the rifle on the hook by the door. We did not pretend the zoo was safe. We called it workable. We understood that new types of infected would test us, and that human groups might push noise or try a gate. We kept the drone charged, and we kept 1 battery on the charger whenever the sun gave us power. We ran drills inside the corridors 2 times a week. I made everyone swap roles on those days so no one got fixed into a single job that could kill the plan if that person fell. Renee protested once, and I told her that I would pack wounds and she would hold the shield for a pass if the day ever demanded it. She nodded and said nothing more. She knew I would mean it. The last thing we did in that first 2-week block was simple. We taped our rules to the clinic door. Hold, move quiet, change the pattern, bite equals final order. We read them out loud once, then we went back to work. We were not finished with anything. We were only starting the part that decides if a base stands or falls. We were in the right place for that fight. We had water that did not rely on a pump house on the river. We had panels that ran our radios and lights. We had fences and lanes that turned big groups into smaller ones. We had a way to clean, cook, and sleep without drawing a crowd. We had 4 people who could do each other's jobs if needed. We had learned the price on the hill. We would pay it again here if the day asked for it. When I lay down that night, the clinic walls felt solid. The tram metal cooled and ticked. The goat pen was quiet. The city was not. It never was. But the sounds that came were expected and mapped. Engines far off, a piece of siding loose on a building, a few calls that would not stop until the bodies failed. I thought about the next lines on our board: ammo count, water level, panel output, fence seams. I ran the list through my head until the numbers held. Then I let them go and slept in short stretches with the rifle near my hand, and the door cracked so I could hear the first step on the hall tiles. We were still alive. The plan was holding. Tomorrow would bring more work and more noise and more tests. That was fine. We were ready to do it again. I started counting the mornings by checklists instead of dates. It kept the house honest and it kept our heads clear. Dawn meant 1 full perimeter walk on the inner ring, a pump cycle, solar check, clinic clean, goat feed, and a short set of drills through the 2 corridors. No speeches, no extra talk. We read what was on the board, slid the bolts under the lines as we finished, and moved on to the next task. The zoo held steady under that rhythm. It was not safe, it was workable, and that was enough. The first hour stayed quiet. I took the ring walk with the rifle low and the spear strapped to my pack. I tapped each hinge and bolt with a finger, not hard, just enough to know nothing had shifted. The tram blockade sat where we left it, wheels chocked and chain tight. The mesh over the head height stayed intact. The waist panels were still in the zigzag, no bent bars, no drag marks. I stopped at the seam the large one had tested and looked at our spring flag under the soil. It hadn't moved. I lifted my head and watched the tree line for a full minute. No wind, no shapes. I called the all clear to Renee in a normal voice, nothing loud. She answered from the clinic. Copy. At the pump yard, the handle moved with a cleaner feel than last week. Noah's leather wrap had seated and the waxed cord didn't slip. He primed with a small pour and worked the handle in a steady rhythm. The first flow came cloudy, then cleared. Ava held a flashlight at an angle to catch any sheen on the surface. There was none. Renee set the settling series, trash drum, coarse drum, fine drum, and started the boil for the 2-liter jar we kept on the med shelf. She had written the chlorine dose on tape and stuck it to the pump body where no one could miss it. Power numbers came good by mid-morning. Ava wiped the panels with a soft brush and checked the combiner box. The lugs hadn't heated. The golf cart batteries were holding charge. She chalked the output on the board. Radios first, med light second, headlamps third, drone if surplus. We stuck to that. No one asked for extra light at night. We worked in the dark where we could and counted steps in familiar rooms. Food stayed simple. Oats, rice, beans, canned meat when we earned it. The raised beds inside the service courtyard had green showing now. Onions and greens. We watered with the last stage from the settling drums and watched for runoff. The goats gave enough milk for a cup each day when we kept the routine tight. We pasteurized every batch. The card with time and temperature was taped to the clinic wall, and no one ignored it. Ava handled the goats with a quiet voice and even hands. They stayed calm. Calm animals meant fewer noises that could draw trouble. Midday was repair and small upgrades. Noah cut 2 lengths of angle iron and drilled holes so the shield panel could lock into the rebar stands without twisting. I moved a row of short planters to block a clean line to the clinic door, in case something got past the first corridor. Renee scrubbed the clinic corners with bleach and swapped a dirty filter from the airbox. We synced hand signals again. 2 taps on metal for See me. 3 taps fast for help. 1 slow tap for all clear. No shouting unless we were inside the same room and in motion. That afternoon brought a trickle of walkers to the concourse. We handled them without shots. We used the poles at the waist panels and the net to break motion. I set a foot on the base of the shield and pushed at the right moment, just enough to make the body lose position. Renee finished one cleanly with a controlled round when it pinned itself on the bar. We moved fast but not frantic. We kept the lane narrow. We dragged bodies to the service lot under a tarp and rinsed tools. The board got a line. Concourse sweep 5, no bites. On the 3rd day of that week, we made a small run to the university maintenance shed 2 blocks off. The map on the wall had flagged it. We left at first light with empty packs and came in on the service alleys between 2 long brick walls. Ava took the lead with the rifle low and kept her eyes on roof edges. I counted windows and checked for curtain movement. Renee watched our rear with quiet steps and a short handlight in her pocket. Noah carried the bolt cutters and a small saw. The maintenance door had a single lock with rust blooming around the hasp. It gave after 2 minutes of slow pressure. Inside, we found gasket material, gloves, a box of leather scraps, and a stack of microfiber cloths that were clean enough to matter. We took a small roll of copper wire and a box of hose clamps. We left the room as quiet as we found it, and came home by a different route so nobody would learn our pattern. The evening brought an odd sound from the primate house. A single clatter like a metal bowl rolling across tile. We froze. I moved to the tram platform and watched the primate door through the glass. Nothing came out. We had closed the rear enclosures last week and wired mesh strips over the back. I waited 5 minutes more, then walked with Noah to the door and listened. The air inside was still. We did not open it. We wrote it on the board and added check fastening to the next morning's list. A list is a promise to yourself that you will not forget under stress. It saved us again and again. The next morning at the primate door, the latch plate had a new scratch where it met the frame. No bending, just a mark. Could have been thermal movement. Could have been an animal bumping glass. We added a second screw and a spacer block so the plate would sit tighter. Ava pulled on the handle and it didn't give or rattle. That was good enough for now. We didn't waste time diagnosing every noise. We tightened what could be tightened and moved on. We extended the cremation trench in the service lot by 4 feet and lined the edge with brick so the soil wouldn't slough into the fire. We staged pallet wood and brush, and we made a small water line with 2 cans for embers. We wrote burn window for the next day at 1 hour after noon, when the breeze stayed steady. We always chose afternoons for burns because the air moved cleaner and the glow would not show in the morning light. We ran a controlled burn that was as clean as we could make it. We stood upwind with masks. We kept the pile low, not high, so it burned hot and quick. We did not stand in a group. We watched. We did our part and then cooled the ash. Renee rinsed tools in bleach, then in clean water, then posted the tools to dry on a rack so we wouldn't pick them up wet and leave prints. It was a careful process, and it had to be the same every time. That predictability, not courage, made it safe. The radio gave us nothing. Static and a faint click once each hour, but no voices we trusted. We didn't broadcast. A broadcast is a flare at night. It reaches ears you don't want. We just listened and wrote the times on the board so we could trace any pattern. There wasn't one. The black trucks came back at the end of that week. Same 2 vehicles, same recorded message about a controlled zone and processing. They parked 2 blocks out and stayed on the cross street where we couldn't get a clean look at the plates. They started the clatter pattern again. Bottles, metal, something like a grate, and fed noise into the alleys. The infected moved toward it. We waited. When the line reached our hedge, I sent the drone for a short run along the river road with the recorded clatter we kept on the micro. The bodies peeled off and followed the sound. The trucks waited. We stayed dark. After 20 minutes, the engine started and the vehicles turned east toward the stadium district. I wrote the time and a short description on the intel board and underlined the line about no engagement. We wouldn't give them a reason to mark us. We were staying on our rules. Week 5 started with a dry wind and a small haze over the east side. We tightened the service door hinges, and swapped out a squeaky one that had started to announce itself at night. Noah added a spring plate to the fence seam where the large one had tested. It was a simple piece of sheet under the soil, with a wire to a flag that would pop when weight came down on it. No sound, just a sign for the overwatch. Ava placed a second flag on the opposite side in case the first broke under a kick. It returned at dusk 2 days later. I saw the shape from the tram platform, wider and taller than the shamblers, moving with a directness that didn't match the others. It walked to the seam and pressed with both hands. It looked at the camera head, then moved out of its view and pressed again. It shifted position at the ties until it found the one with the least movement. The flag popped. I called positions in a normal voice and heard the answers. Renee took the clinic door. Ava took the upper window. Noah moved to the tram corner. The large one reached for the seam a third time, then stepped back and tested the bottom. No hurry, no wasted motion. It came at the gap with a slow grind, shoulders pressed, trying to roll the fence off its mounts. The carriage bolts held. It came again. It shifted to the right and tested that side. Then 2 fast movers showed in the lane behind it and started to pace. I held fire. The large one had to be managed in the sally port where we had the shield and the angles. When the fast movers came too close on the panel, Noah took one with a 2-round pair at the range card mark and dropped the second the same way when it went to ground to push under. Clean shots. No rush. The large one ignored the bodies and set its shoulder to the seam again. The flag bobbed. The mesh creaked. It moved enough to put a forearm through. That was our moment. I opened the sally port and set the shield into the notches. Renee took the near angle with the pistol. I held the spear low. It pushed into the mouth and met the shield, then tried to roll left around it. I drove the spear up into the hip and forced the body sideways. It reached for the shield edge with one hand, and I yanked the chain up and over its arm. Renee shot the knee joint once. The leg buckled. It still moved with intent, pulling against the chain, getting the hand to the shield again. Ava put one controlled round into the shoulder joint. The arm slumped. The body shifted its weight forward and tried to go through on elbows. I reseated the spear into the pelvic seam, leaned in, and kept it there until the movement turned to minor resistance and then stopped. We held position for a count and then locked the sally port again. It was over in less than a minute because we did not rush and we used the equipment we had prepared. We dragged the body to the service lot under a tarp. We did the bleach rinse and we wrote the time and the type on the board. That board was the truth of our days. The next morning, 2 people approached the outer fence from the school side. A man and a woman, both thin. The man held a bucket. The woman kept her hands up. We met them inside the hedge, where they could not see our posts clearly. The man called out that he had a sick friend and needed water. I answered that we would leave 2 liters on a line 20 feet ahead. He tried to move closer. I did not move. He stepped back and nodded. We set the bottles on a line tied to a post and pulled it tight so it would not bounce. We walked out of sight and waited. They took the water and left. No trade, no names, no gate. I wrote height, clothes, and direction on the card and pinned it to the board. Respect from distance is the only version that works long-term. We closed week 6 by tightening the catwalk on the clinic roof. We laid plank across 2 brackets and braced it with a center bolt so we could move along the edge without hugging the parapet. We ran a safety line along the roof edge for hands. We wanted cleaner angles on the concourse without a lean. Work like that saves focus in a fight. Sanitation pushed back hard in the heat. The far paddock started to smell in the afternoon when the wind turned. We walked the line and pulled small carcass remains into a cart with gloves and masks. We added them to the trench, burned hot, and raked clean ash. We added a bleach wash to the cart wheels, then moved the cart through a shallow pan so we didn't track residue into the living areas. Renee posted a 72-hour watch for any cuts and moved antibiotics to the deepest punctures only. Scratches got soap, bleach, air, and clean dressings. We logged every mark and checked it at each meal. No one skipped. That was not negotiable. The big push came one morning in week 7 when a steam main broke in the district and released a roar that did not stop. The sound carried across blocks and bounced off buildings. It drew infected in from 3 sides. 3 screamers reached our perimeter at different corners and started calling in an overlapping pattern. It pulled a mixed horde toward the zoo. We moved to positions fast but without shouting. The drone went up with recorded clatter to bend the eastern flow toward the stadium road. That cut one line away and eased pressure on the main gate. Renee and Ava took the screamers at the first markable shot from fixed posts. They neutralized them in order of risk to our lanes. Noah set for fast movers at the waist barriers and used the pre-marked holds. I took the sally port and the shield and kept bodies from building into a ramp against the panel. The zoo's lanes did the work we set them up to do. The first corridor took the bulk of the load and slowed it. Fast movers hit the waist bars and rolled into the net. Jumpers caught the overhead mesh and lost all speed, then slid into the obstacles. We kept the corridor narrow and funneled everything into predictable spots. Renee called changes in a normal tone so we didn't waste breath. Ava shifted as directed and conserved rounds. Noah stayed on the holds and didn't chase any runner off the cards. I kept the shield in the notches and pushed back when the bar bowed. We had a moment where the mesh threatened to rip. Ava saw the strain and moved a foot right and fired where the bind would force the next body. It fell at the base of the panel and made a step for the next three. I stepped into that space, broke the step with the shield, and reset the panel. We passed through that failure point without losing the line. After that, the numbers thinned. The sound of the steam main eased and the flow settled back into scattered walkers. We stood in positions for 1 minute without moving. Then we began cleanup. Cleanup was slow and dirty. We did not rush. The service lot trench took the first loads. We burned in batches and kept the pile low. We cooled ash and rinsed tools. We checked boots and changed gloves between tasks. Renee held out a strip of cloth for each of us and watched our hands while we wiped them. That was habit now. Habit saves lives when attention gets pulled. We drank water in measured sips and sat on the clinic steps for 5 minutes. No talk, just a reset. In the days after the push, we rebuilt. We added sacrificial fence panels inside the corridor, designed to fail inward into a shallow pit so bodies would fall into a hole and not pile up against the gate. We painted blue lines on the clinic floors for zero light movement, showing the safest path from door to door. We added grab rails on the catwalk so anyone could work the upper window without needing a second person to anchor him. We pre-staged 2 rebar stakes with caps near the sally port for spear support in case the chain jerked free in the wet. We checked the aquarium again. The tanks were drained and dry. We taped black paper to any glass that could reflect motion at night. We sealed lower doors with strips of rubber from the maintenance shop so the wind wouldn't whistle when the temperature dropped. We set a small supply cache inside with water and 2 pouches, not for comfort but for an emergency move if the clinic had to be abandoned for a few hours. It was not likely. We did it anyway. A week later, we took a measured run to the hospital laundry, 2 blocks north, to look for bleach and clean cloth. We approached at dawn along the rail service lane. 2 walkers drifted out as we reached the dock. Noah used a pole to hold one back, and I finished it over the drain so we had less mess on hard ground. The laundry room was clear and held 6 sealed jugs of bleach and a stack of towels. We took 3 jugs and a bag of towels. That load was heavy enough. We left and crossed 3 backyards to cut the line of sight. No one followed. We moved without comment and put the jugs in the clinic closet behind a locked door. Renee labeled each with a strip of tape and a date so we could track use. The goats stayed steady. They had stopped looking toward the public side for movement and settled into the pen. We kept rule of no calls or whistles near the pen, quiet handling only. Ava groomed them with a soft brush and swept the pen to keep pests down. We burned the sweepings in a small can in the service yard so nothing would carry smells across the path. The range gave us a few more magazines and a small case of slugs. We tested 2 slugs at the corridor to confirm drop at the range card's longest mark. The marks matched our earlier estimates. We recorded the hold in the corner of the card and taped it down. We cleaned the barrel and logged the shot count for the day so we would not guess later when accuracy dipped. On one of the late week nights, I woke to a change in the air inside the clinic. Not a sound. Just the way space feels when someone is standing in a doorway. I reached for the rifle, swung my feet to the floor, and waited. Renee whispered from the hall. Flag popped at the seam. Her voice had no tremor. I moved to the door and looked down the hall. Ava already had the upper window covered. Noah took the tram corner. I went to the sally port and listened. There was weight on the mesh. Not much. A single walker pressed lightly and then released. It tested again. The rhythm had gaps that did not match the usual pushing. I waited. A second person, alive, moved in the hedge. A foot scraped. Not an infected drag, a careful step. He made one more test, then a third sound to the right, as if someone leaned on a post. I did not call out. He lingered 2 minutes, then moved off into the dark with 2 slow steps, then 4 quicker ones. I kept my hand on the latch until I was sure they were out of the lane. In the morning, we found 2 places where a hand had brushed the mesh clean. That told me we were marked as a place with life. We did not change routine. We changed our pattern times by a small margin each day to avoid a predictable window. We improved the alarm grid with 2 more lines of fish line and cans in the hedge. We spread them out so a run through the same opening would strike new lines each time. We moved 1 camera head to a higher mount and tested the angle from the roof. It covered the service lane without broadcasting a silhouette. These small changes matter more than big gestures. They are the difference between a quiet day and a loss. Week 8 brought a cooler morning and a steady wind from the river. The smoke in the distance was light. We walked the ring and came back with nothing to report. I stood on the clinic roof with Renee and watched the streets beyond the zoo. We saw 2 walkers crossing against the wind, drifting without purpose. No black trucks, no human groups, no animals moving outside the birds on the pond beyond the fence. The city was not empty, but it was quieter. Fewer swarms, more single walkers. It might have been a seasonal shift, or it might have been that many had burned or starved in the last weeks. We didn't place meaning on it. We adjusted to what we saw. We kept our drills, once in the morning and once in the afternoon if the day was calm. We swapped roles each session so no one had a fixed position that would cripple the plan if a person went down. Renee drove the shield while I worked a pole. Ava took the sally port one time and held ground. Noah ran the upper window and called ranges with dry fire. We treated drills as seriously as fights and ended them with tools cleaned and logged. That habit is boring when nothing happens. It saves your life when something does. We opened 1 more room for controlled use, the aquarium back office. It had a heavy door and no windows. We stacked food and spare clothing inside and a small first aid kit. We left 2 bottles of water and a short metal bar by the door in case someone had to force it closed in a hurry. We told Ava that if she ever got cut off at the concourse, she would pivot to the aquarium office and lock in, then signal with 2 taps on the pipe. The plan made her calmer. Plans do that when they are real and tested. A day later, a single fast mover came in hot from the outer road. It took the hedge at a run and hit the mesh line with enough speed to tear 1 tie. It landed badly and bounced into the barrier. I stepped into the sally port and blocked its path with the shield. It hit the edge and tried to slip past on the low side. I dropped the shield corner, pinned a foot, and Noah put a single round into center mass from the mark at the tram corner. It rolled and tried again. Renee moved in on the side and finished it with a controlled pair when it lifted its head. The whole fight took less than 15 seconds because the panel changed its path. Small edges multiplied. We managed 1 more scavenging run to a closed restaurant supply house. We wanted steel shelving for a sacrificial barricade and 2 more carts. The front was useless. We went around the back and found a roll-up door stuck a foot off the ground. Noah levered it with a jack handle and I slid a block under it. We worked through on our backs and stood up inside. We kept lights off. We walked with hands on shelving until our eyes adjusted. We found 3 racks and 2 carts with good wheels. We moved slow and lifted our feet clean so the wheels wouldn't bang. We took what we needed and left the rest. We stowed the carts under the tram platform and built a second layer of barricade at the concourse with the racks in a V, so bodies would have to turn twice to reach the clinic. More turns mean slower targets. The water system needed 1 more improvement. The settling drums worked, but we wanted redundancy. We added a second series with 2 tubs and a final bucket with a filter. We placed the second series near the goat pen so we could use it for animals and washing without crossing lines. We marked all containers with drink, wash, or tools, and enforced that rule. Cross-use is how infections start in small groups. We posted our rules again on the clinic door. Hold, move quiet, change the pattern, bite equals final order. We read them out loud one more time. We did not add extra rules. These 4 covered what we faced. On the last night of this stretch, I sat on the clinic roof with Renee and watched the concourse. Noah checked panel output and wrote the numbers on the board. Ava marked new seam points on a photocopied map and taped it down. We didn't say much. We listened to the air and the small clicks of the building settling. The zoo was not a fortress. It was a place with walls, water, and lanes we could bend. We had turned it into a base with a plan. We had held through pushes and tests. We had not lost anyone. That counted more than any story about luck or courage. We chose the city over the fields because it gave us cover and salvage and known lines. The zoo gave us something better. Seams we could manage and water we could pump with our own hands. The goats gave us milk and routine. The panels gave us radios and light. The clinic gave us clean rooms and doors that closed. The tram gave us height. The corridors gave us fights on our terms. We were not waiting for rescue. We were doing work. We were learning small truths about how to live inside a dead grid. I closed my eyes for a few minutes and let the checklist build itself again in my head. Ring walk, pump, solar, clinic clean, goat feed, drills, repairs, burn, sleep in shifts. Every piece had a reason, and every reason tied into the next day. It was not hope. It was method. It was what we had when the city gave nothing back. We would keep it until the pattern failed. Then we would write a new one. For now, the line held. The pump worked, the panels charged, and the doors closed. We stayed. We would be here again in the morning, ready to do the same work, with the same care, in the same order, until something forced a change. And if that day came, we would meet it with the same clear plan. Lock, direct, reduce, clean. That's all for now, survivor. Thanks for listening. If you want to keep these stories alive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. And a huge thank you to everyone supporting this channel with extra memberships, especially Carlos Herrera, Luca Mod, Jaydala, The Great Anywho. Thanks. Also drop a comment and let me know what story you want to hear next. Jack's Nightmares signing off.